We have been doing a little traveling, yes. We've been in the Galapagos, we've been in Iceland, and a frustrated trip to Greenland. And,
wonderful.
And yes, but we are now in Connecticut.
What's the next trip?
The next trip, we just came back from Vermont. We go back and forth to Vermont. The next trip is going to be to the Caribbean at the end of November.
Wonderful. Well,
What
good
about
for you. Well, nothing much planned. We have been going up to a place in Lake Superior in Bayfield, Wisconsin.
Oh, that's lovely, lovely.
But my son is applying to colleges, so we've been going back and forth to St. Louis, where he's a student. So
wonderful, wonderful.
Anyway, we're having fun. Let's see.
Understand Maria will introduce me.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, Daniel, thanks for being here.
Robert, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Today is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Daniel Nijensohn. He was born in Mendoza, Argentina, where he graduated in Cuyo Medical School with a summa cum laude and gold medalist, first in his class. Then he served as a foreign medical war volunteer in the Six-Day War in Tel Aviv. And then he followed several internships and he trained as a neurosurgeon at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And he also got a Master of Science in Neurosurgery of University of Minnesota and a doctorate in University of Cuyo Neuroanatomy. He's Emeritus Chief of Neurosurgery at St. Vincent's Medical Center, Honorary Neurosurgeon, Bridgeport Hospital, and also as past staff at Yale, New Haven. He's also an Honorary Professor of Neurosurgery in Yale School of Medicine, and he was past president of the Connecticut Neurosurgery Society. Within his many interests, he's a world, and achievements that I cannot summarize here in 3-minute introduction. He's a world-known lecturer and an expert in art, in medicine, and in neurosurgery. And he gave a fantastic talk, an abbreviated version of this talk for the Roton opening gala of the laboratory here in Rochester. And we are very fortunate to have the longer version of this talk today. So welcome and thank you very much, Dr. Nijensohn.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Paris. And thank you for having me. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for your attention. I will talk for about 50 minutes. The Sistine Chapel's frescoes are some of the world's most magnificent works of art. They contain hidden neuroanatomic messages encoded in beautiful visual language, painted in Rome by Michelangelo 500 years ago. Our multidisciplinary team of 5 authors attempted to decipher this code by studying in detail high-definition photographs and by performing human brain dissections using approaches already available in the context of Renaissance neuroanatomy and secular philosophy. The search for the universal truth may be found here, encoded through the divine, the human, and the scientific all at once. In an article published in the Neuroscientist on July 22, 2022, we concluded that beyond speculation, apophenia, pareidolia, and/or biologic reductionism, there is compelling evidence of anatomic symbolism in Michelangelo's frescoes. He seems to have strategically woven double images into the frescoes. Are the double images a code? The paintings are certainly replete with anatomic structures, with subtle semiotic significance. And furthermore, we acknowledge the presence in this study of poetic metaphor, allegory, parable, and even open symbolism. I gave, as Dr. Peris mentioned, a brief summary of this work at the formal opening of the Mayo Clinic's Roton Surgical Anatomy Laboratory in Rochester on September 24, 2022. The meeting was held at the Keller, the same hotel where I got married to my wife Goldie in 1972, more than 50 years ago. And about us, the authors, Dr. Luis Savastano, the leading author in the staff of the Mayo Clinic Department of Neurosurgery, Rochester until 2022, is now at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center. He trained as a neurosurgeon at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I am the senior author. I trained in neurosurgery at Mayo from 71 to 77. I am an honorary professor of neurosurgery at the Yale University School of Medicine in New Haven, Connecticut, and an emeritus chief of neurosurgery at hospitals in Bridgeport, Connecticut. As Dr. Peris mentioned, both of us came to the US from Mendoza, Argentina, where we both graduated at the top of the class as gold medalists at the same medical school, the Universidad Nacional de Cuyo's Faculty of Medical Sciences, 40 years apart. I am one of Dr. Savastano's mentors, a proud Mayo alumnus. And here is a photograph of the Mayo Clinic Department of Neurologic Surgery, Rochester, Minnesota in 1971, the year I began my training at Mayo. I am in the back row. The following year, Al Roton left and Ed Loss arrived. I came to the US from Argentina in 1970, and after a surgical internship at Baylor in Houston, Texas, I moved to Rochester, Minnesota in 1971. I have been a Connecticut neurosurgeon since 1977 and a Yale clinical faculty member since then. The rest of the authors are Dr. Philip Eliasoph, an expert in visual arts, an art historian, a professor at the Department of Fine Arts, Fairfield University, a Jesuit university in Fairfield, Connecticut, Robert Morreale, MS, a medical illustrator at the Biomedical and Scientific Visualization Department, Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science, Rochester, Minnesota, and Dr. Teodoro Forcht-Dagi, a Harvard-trained neurosurgeon from Boston, Massachusetts, affiliated with Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland in the UK, and also with Mayo. Theo and I were together in Rochester in 2022 at the Roton Affair. Please see right lower corner. So 4 out of the 5 of us are Mayo people, presently or in the past. And we report no conflicts of interest, except that one of my last names is Simuni, and the family lore is that the branch of my family were Spanish Jews that lived in Tuscany for hundreds of years before moving east. Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, claims Harvey Cushing as one of its own. Cushing is the acknowledged father of neurosurgery, at least in the US. Manuel Balado, right lower corner, founder of neurosurgery in Argentina, trained under Alfred Adson at Mayo 100 years ago. Fred Kerr, in the left side of the slide, also born in Argentina, was one of my Mayo mentors. And he used to say, quote, neurosurgery attracts the most vicious personalities. Here is the portrait of an elderly Michelangelo. He was known by his contemporaries as Il Divino. Michelangelo was an angry and creative genius, a true polymath, a painter, poet, architect, urbanist, an intellectual, a scientist, an anatomist. First and foremost, he was a great sculptor, the creator of sublime pieces like Moses in Rome, David in Florence, La Pietà at St. Peter's, among others. It is known that Neoplatonic humanists and many other thinkers greatly influenced Michelangelo. In this talk, there is a convergence of the fields of neuroscience, neuroanatomy, philosophy and theology, history, and the arts. Michelangelo's complete name was Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, known simply as Michelangelo. He was born in 1475 in Capra, Tuscany, a village near Arezzo between Florence and Ferrara, and died in Rome in 1564 at age 89. He was a Caprese, and his final resting place is in Florence, not in Rome, at the Basilica of the Santa Croce. You can see Dr. Eliasoph in front of the Basilica. Michelangelo painted frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, located within the Vatican in Rome. Goethe once said, quote, "Without having seen the Sistine Chapel, one can form no appreciable idea of what one man is capable of achieving." The chapel was built in the 15th century of the Common Era by Pope Sixtus IV, hence its name, using the dimensions of the central building of King Solomon's first Jewish temple, the Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem, as described in the Old Testament. Rectangular in shape, 132 feet long, 40 feet wide, and 70 feet high. Solomon's first Jewish temple was completed around 3,000 years ago and was destroyed by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II about 2,500 years ago, and then rebuilt shortly thereafter as the Second Temple, destroyed by the Romans under Titus in the year 70 of the Common Era. Julius II, known as the Warrior Pope, was the first pope to hire Michelangelo, initially just to decorate the ceiling of the chapel. Much later, Popes Clement VII and Paul III rehired him to decorate the altar wall, where he painted the fresco mural, The Final Judgment. The ceiling includes an arched vault in the center, as well as spandrels, lunettes, pendentives, and arched windows all around the vault. There are 9 Genesis-inspired frescoes in the vault, surrounded by frescoes of 8 Jesus ancestors, 7 biblical prophets, 5 sibyls, and 4 biblical stories. There are also paintings by other artists around the chapel that complete the ensemble. A recent exhibition touring the US shows the Michelangelo frescoes in high-definition photographs. We first studied in depth 3 of the first 4 scenes painted on the ceiling. They were created by Michelangelo last as a single project, from right to left, the separation of light and darkness, the creation of the sun, moon, and earth, and the creation of Adam. They are part of 9 frescoes depicting scenes from the biblical book of Genesis. We then studied the Final Judgment fresco painted on the altar wall. Here is the half of the ceiling and the 3 frescoes we studied first. Please see the blue stars. There are at least 50 books just in English published since the year 2000 on Michelangelo and his work, stemming from the fact that in 1980, the Catholic Church embarked on an ambitious project to restore the Sistine Chapel and bring the magnificent frescoes back to their original beauty. And for the first time in centuries, it was suddenly possible to see detail and colors that were hidden for a long time. We support the proposition that Michelangelo likely concealed advanced philosophical, theological, neuroanatomical, and neurophysiological information in the frescoes he painted in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, at the center of Catholicism. We think Michelangelo foresaw some of our present understanding of religion and neuroscience and left this information in the frescoes he painted. He did most of the work by himself, with just a few assistants. The illustration on the right shows incorrectly how it was thought he did most of the work, lying on his back, but he actually painted the frescoes standing up. Here is his own sketch. Please see the left side of the slide of him at work, painting standing up. Contemporary Michelangelo biographies were written by Giorgio Vasari, center, and by Ascanio Condivi, right. As mentioned, our multidisciplinary group of 5 authors wrote and published a paper in 2022, where we suggest that some Michelangelo frescoes are about the human brain. Furthermore, we think there is a purposeful link between the anatomy and the function of the visualized cerebral structure, as it was understood at the time, and the theme of the painting. Already, Hippocrates, who lived between 460 and 370 BCE, thought that the brain housed faculties of sensation and intelligence. But the younger Aristotle, who lived between 384 and 322 BCE, disagreed and situated intelligence in the heart. The brain, he argued, just cooled the blood. Galen, who lived from 129 to 216 CE, situated man's thought and intelligence in the cerebral ventricles, then known as cells. It was thought that they contained the spiritus animalis, or psychic pneuma. In 1990, Frank Lloyd Meshberger from Anderson, Indiana, reported in JAMA that in the creation of Adam, the ceiling central fresco, there seems to be a pink human brain hidden behind God's figure. Meshberger died in 2020. Did Michelangelo draw a brain there? Well, Michelangelo had a lifelong interest in anatomy, beginning public dissections in his early teens in Florence at the court of Lorenzo de' Medici il Magnifico, where he was exposed to many intellectuals. By the way, at the time of his life, only cadavers of criminals were allowed for dissection by the church. And during his life, Florence became known as Athens on the Arno. Michelangelo was influenced by the great Leonardo da Vinci. And later on, Michelangelo in turn had an influence on Andreas Vesalius. Vesalius founded modern human anatomy. In neuroanatomy, we talk of 3 planes: coronal, sagittal, and horizontal or axial. Michelangelo painted the frescoes as a sculptor anatomist, understanding these planes very well. Our neuroanatomic dissections reproduce approaches used by Vesalius as described in his 1543 book, De Humani Corporis Fabrica. The in situ technique in the skull, as seen in the slide, from double A to double G, leads to a view of the dorsal brainstem. Please see the red star at G in the left lower corner. The unblocked technique outside the skull leads to a view of the ventral brainstem. Please see the blue arrow at H in the right lower corner. Vesalius' book has great illustrations. The ventricular system is displayed in more realistic way than in previous anatomy books. And a great collection of Vesaliana is found at the Yale School of Medicine in New Haven, Connecticut, assembled by Harvey Cushing. In fact, Harvey Cushing's fatal MI in 1939 was while lifting a heavy Vesalius volume. Neuroanatomy is often associated with Leonardo. We can now say that there seems to also exist a neuroanatomic Michelangelo Code in the Sistine Chapel frescoes. Leonardo did wonderful neuroanatomic drawings. Dr. Matteo Realdo Colombo, the Cremonensis, was Michelangelo's good friend, collaborator, and personal physician. Colombo was also first a disciple and then a colleague in Padua of the already mentioned great anatomist Vesalius. Dr. Colombo put an emphasis on vivisection in order to learn about the different functions of the human body. We see in the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel a metamorphosis of biblical imagery into an encoded, exquisite anatomic map. And I will give you a glimpse of this code painted by the great Michelangelo. I will tell you about some secrets of the Sistine Chapel. A neuroanatomic code is present in the first Genesis ceiling fresco. In the beginning, located at the end of the ceiling near the altar wall. A code is also found in the second fresco, the creation of the sun, the moon, and the plants of the earth. And in the central fresco, the creation of Adam. And in the Last Judgment, painted on the altar wall 25 years after the painting of the ceiling, with implications regarding the pursuit of the essential truth. So here we go. Up on the ceiling is fresco number 1, in the beginning. In the beginning, God divided or separated light, upper right within the rectangular frame, from darkness. We think Michelangelo hid the dorsal surface of the human brainstem using a technique that placed it under God's robe, emphasizing that in the beginning, it was the creation of the human mind, the spirit and the soul, the arousal of consciousness and of awareness, the awakening. Michelangelo, in a prescient manner, placed these functions in the human dorsal brainstem. On the right, we see delineated in front of God's chest the hidden 4 colliculi of the tectum, the 2 superior and the 2 inferior colliculi, and the superior and inferior brachiae. The cerebral peduncles are the arms of God. The pineal gland is up and in the center, in the front of God's neck, above the ventral brainstem within a goiter, previously noted by Suk and Tamargo from Johns Hopkins in 2010. The trochlear or 4th cranial nerves exit dorsally under the tectum, and we also see the vertical trajectory of the central aqueduct, the superior medullary velum, the stria medullaris, the rhomboid fossa or floor of the 4th ventricle, and the caudally located obex. In the ceiling fresco, the divine robe in purple color covers God and the dorsal human brainstem. On the right, we see one of our fresh brain specimens with the exposed dorsal brainstem, one of the 10 human brains that were dissected for this study. The dorsal brainstem extends from the thalamic pulvinar cranially to the calamus scriptorius and obex caudally. And as mentioned, within the blue rectangle, please see the left half of the slide, in the thyroid gland area or goiter is the ventral brainstem, as illustrated by Suk and Tamargo in the past. Repeating, the 4 bulges of God's chest under the vestment represent the tectum or the quadrigeminal plate, the 4 colliculi. Please see the red arrow. In the right half of this slide, we see above and on the right a black and white photograph of an anatomic specimen of the human dorsal brainstem, but below there is a drawing of the floor of the 4th ventricle showing the inferior triangle and the stria medullaris. Please see the blue arrows. God's figure in the fresco painted by Michelangelo is on the left, and on the right, our own artist's drawing overlapping the fresco with a sketch of the dorsal brainstem. One of our in situ dissected human brainstems is seen on the blue towel on the left, and on the right, a charcoal drawing of the dorsal brainstem. The blue arrow shows the tectum. And here is the anatomy of the dorsal brainstem as per Dr. Al Roton. And in summary, in the first fresco, the dorsal brainstem is seen in God's chest, arms, and abdomen under the garments, while the ventral brainstem can be visualized in God's anterior neck in the thyroid or goiter. And in physiology, it is well known that some of the brainstem functions are vital. Galen observed during the dissection that when one presses on the floor of the fourth ventricle of an animal, a deep stupor follows, and when there is damage, the result is coma or even death. Respiratory and cardiovascular centers are located there. Fresco number 2, the creation of the sun, the moon, and the plants, corresponds to the third day of Genesis. God creates the sun and the moon on the right half of the Michelangelo fresco, and then on the left, God turns around, shows his buttocks, and goes on to create the plants of the earth. We see the front on the right and the back on the left of God in this fresco. We propose that the sun and the moon represent the two human eyes. The sun, the right eye, the moon, the left eye, the arms, the optic nerves, meeting centrally in the optic chiasm. This time, the ventral surface of the brainstem, the front of the brainstem, is hidden under God's robes, with the mammillary bodies, the interpeduncular fossa, the cerebral cross, and the ventral pons. So we discern in this fresco part of the optic system and the ventral view of the brainstem. This drawing is our own artist's interpretation. The ventral brainstem and the optic apparatus are on the blue towel on the right of the slide, as per our own cerebral dissection, made en bloc. The orange arrows point to the mammillary bodies, both in the colorized drawing and in the anatomic specimen. The model shows the ventral face of the brainstem and adjacent anatomical structures. Rostrally, God's buttocks represent the lenticular or lentiform nuclei. Most caudally is the spinal cord, and in between, of course, the ventral brainstem. God's bum is on the left. We propose that the bare bum of God corresponds to the two lenticular or lentiform nuclei cephalad to the ventral brainstem. Please see the blue arrow. In pharaonic Egypt, the god Horus was represented by both eyes. The right eye, the sun, the god Ra, and the left eye, the moon, the god Thoth, the eye of Horus. The right, the eye of Ra. The eye of Ra is the eye that sees everything. The sun, the right eye, is painted by Michelangelo in gold in concentric circles. See the left and center in an antero-posterior view. The moon on the right upper corner and in the lower half of the slide is a sagittal section of the anterior part of the left eye with cornea and lens, and is painted in silver. Repeating, and as per the slide, our own artist's creation, the sun, the right eye, the moon, the left eye, the arms, the optic nerves, the optic chiasm, and the optic tracts, and then the ventral surface of the brainstem under the robe. and from Albert Rotton's atlas, the optic nerves, chiasm, tracts, an empty pituitary fossa, a central pituitary stalk, blood vessels, etc. Up in the ceiling of the chapel is the fresco. The sun, the right eye, the moon, the left eye. Skipping fresco number 3, we move to the center of the ceiling, to fresco number 4. Perhaps the most famous painting in the world, La creazione di Adamo, in Italian, the creation of Adam. Or is it Adam's creation? The human brain is in a pink mantle surrounding God and other figures. We suggest that Michelangelo represented the cerebral ventricular system, perhaps to illustrate what was then thought to be the seat of the human mind and soul after Galen. Question, is God the one creating man or vice versa? Adam is shown by Michelangelo as a complete nude male adult with an umbilicus from an obvious placental origin.
Giving a lecture on the Sistine Chapel.
And from the Wall Street Journal, April 2023, is that a secret Michelangelo selfie at the Sistine Chapel? A new theory suggests that the Renaissance master modeled his iconic image of God after himself. The Last Judgment, or Il Giudizio Universale, is a monumental work of art, the largest single fresco mural of the 16th century. It was painted in the altar wall from 1536 to 1541, past the High Renaissance. Michelangelo started it 25 years after the ceiling, at age 65. He painted more than 300 figures, mostly male nudes. Later, a pupil of Michelangelo, Daniele da Volterra, was commissioned to cover the figure's nakedness. The Volterra intervention earned him the nickname of the maker of bridges, Il Braghettone. We propose that the fresco represents a coronal cut of the human brain. Jesus, looking muscular, Apollo-like, angry and stern, and Mary, a much smaller figure to our left, his right, are in the midline, in the center, like the pineal gland in the anatomic specimen on the right. And you can see in the middle of the posterior third ventricle, and also like the sun in the heliocentric model of the solar system of Copernicus and later of Galileo. The two central figures are surrounded by saints and angels. Some are recognizable. St. John the Baptist with animal skin and St. Lawrence with a gridiron, see left blue arrows. St. Peter on the far right, white arrow, holding the keys of heaven. Behind him and to our left, his right, is Moses, raising his right hand. But is it St. Bartholomew also on the right? So attributes,
Trying to look at it, but I can't find what he's.
attributes as evidence of his martyrdom. His martyrdom and execution was by skinning or flaying. We think it is Dr. Colombo. Please see Colombo's portrait in black and white in the left lower corner.
I'm looking.
Maybe we can suggest everyone to put their computers on mute. Please see Colombo's portrait in black and white in the left lower corner. Realdo Colombos appears to be the man with the dissecting knife. Dr. Colombo is holding the knife used to dissect and flay bodies. His drawn portrait is in the right lower corner, and next to it and in color is Michelangelo's painting. He is seen as the face of the flayed body, and self-portrait, right upper corner, black arrow. So Michelangelo gave an important role to an anatomy surgeon who is about to start dissecting the left leg of Jesus, the Son of God. And this is the classical dichotomy: flesh and soul, carnal and divine, mortal and immortal, the quest for the eternal truth. As an interesting aside, Saint Moses is behind and left of Saint Peter to his right, with a possible Dutch-Vitren's right hand. Michelangelo was a great clinical observer. But we ask again, did he really paint brains there? Or even, as has been suggested not only by us, a kidney, uterus, placenta, heart, thyroid goiter, the optic apparatus, an extra rib, a Dupuytren's hand, gematria? And we also ask ourselves, is not all painting an illusion? In the slide, we see a Greek prophetess and oracle, the Delphic Sibyl, and Joel, the biblical prophet, as per Michelangelo. Over 500 years ago, this great Renaissance genius appears to have unlocked some of the greatest mysteries of neuroscience. And as we attempt today to bring together the different themes of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, we are just catching up with the infinite universe of this Florentine master, considered already in his lifetime an uomo universale, a universal man. Translational neuroscience in functional neurosurgery attempts to understand human cognition and explore human potential by sparking interdisciplinary inquiry. Two entities still remain enigmatic: the mind and the soul. The challenge of understanding mind and soul, spirit and consciousness continues today. Galen's localization of imagination, reasoning, judgment, and memory in the cerebral ventricles collapsed once it was evident that the functional units, the neurons, lay in the parenchyma of the brain, not in the cavities, the ventricles. Don Santiago Ramón y Cajal played an important role in the history of neuroscience by developing the neuron theory. These illustrations are from his book, The Beautiful Brain, from the early 20th century. Under the microscope, brain tissue shows 100 billion neurons connected by 100 trillion synapses, and multiple interneuronal connections are commensurate with the staggering complexity of human thought and experience. Conscious levels go from coma to consciousness or wakefulness. Understanding human consciousness is still a formidable challenge. In addition to ours, there have been several reports of hidden anatomic brain representations in the Sistine Chapel's frescoes in Rome, from A to D, as well as in other places like in the Cathedral of Ferrara, E. And here is an iconographic review from A to I of the evolution of the anatomic ventricular theory of the mind from Galen and Avicenna to Leonardo Vesalius and others. Both neuroanatomy and the understanding of the brain-mind relationship had a very slow evolution in the period of 1,000 years plus following Galen. The worm idea was a predominant theory of the mind during Avicenna's time. He lived from 960 CE to 1037 CE. The theory stated that there are several brain ventricles or cells, and that the worm guards the entrance to the posterior ventricle. Please see the blue arrow. Albertus Magnus, around 1250 CE, postulated that the mind is located in 3 cerebral ventricles. And the great Leonardo held firm initially to the 3 ventricles theory, He drew them in 1520 CE following Galen's 3 ventricles or 3 cells with the spiritus animalis and the pneuma. Regarding function, Leonardo thought that the first cell or ventricle was in charge of reception, the second did the processing or sensus commune, and the third was in charge of memory or storage. Vesalius in 1543 CE envisioned a more realistic depiction of the ventricular system. He was followed by many, including Juan Valverde de Amusco in 1560 CE in Spain. Amusco was a student of Realdo Colombo and Bartholomew Eustachy. Please see Amusco's Plate Man from his anatomy book. Many others followed, including Baruch Spinoza, who lived between 1632 and 1677, and René Descartes, who wrote in 1685 in Le Traité de l'Homme about dualism, stated cogito ergo sum, and considered the pineal gland as the third eye, as the site of the soul. To the present, the consciousness system is complex. John Hughlings Jackson, Wilder Penfield and Herbert Jasper, Moruzzi and Magoon, and other pioneers conceived major theories of consciousness. Hal Blumenfeld from Yale has proposed a pyramidal working model of the mind, and Pandya in India wrote his now classical paper on the brain, mind, and soul, and the human brain. Where is cognition? In search of it, we study behavior, the brain, circuits, cell, molecules, the cortical neurons. The pattern of cortical connectivity underlies cognition. It is what makes us human. Recent data from functional MR studies have made us aware of the extensive network of neurons in the cerebral hemispheres that subserve the functions of the mind. The human cerebral cortex and the neural circuits for cognition are at the center of the research of the mind. Leonardo, Vesalius, and Michelangelo were pioneering neuroscientists. They were interested in the brain, and specifically the brainstem. As you all know, the human brainstem is vital and exquisitely delicate. It controls respiration and heartbeat, arousal and sleep, awareness and non-awareness, and if damaged, it leads to coma and unconsciousness. In other words, life and or death, light and or darkness. Michelangelo was obsessed with the human brainstem. The brainstem is the anatomical structure hidden deep inside our heads, made of the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, with rugosities, eminences, bulges, swellings and ridges, depressions, grooves, and folds on both the dorsal and ventral external surfaces, anticipating and predicting what lies inside, the nuclei, the tracts, vital respiratory centers in green, and cardiovascular centers in purple are within the pons and the medulla. In neurosurgical operative experiences, this area of the brain is known as tiger country. And it has been said, if we accept the existence of the soul and of its location in the brain, we must focus on the brainstem. Some of the known functions of the brainstem are illustrated in the slide. Full consciousness seems to reside in the paramedian brainstem tegmentum. It has been called the abode of the soul, as Michelangelo suspected. The ascending reticular activating system, in yellow in the slide, is mostly located in the brainstem. Here is the human dorsal brainstem in a charcoal drawing. The ventral brainstem. Now back to Michelangelo and the Sistine frescoes. In the beginning, the dorsal and ventral brainstem, the creation of the sun or the moon, the visual system, and the ventral brainstem. Adam's creation or the creation of Adam, the cerebral ventricular system, and God. In creation of Adam, a mid-sagittal section of the brain. Jesus and the Virgin Mary, surrounded by saints in the Last Judgment, form the structures seen in the coronal brain section. The central figure seems to be in the posterior third ventricle, and Dr. Colombo appears to be the anatomist and surgeon. Finally, it has been said that before his death, Michelangelo burned all his notes, cartoons, and drawings. There were about 1,000 drawings and sketches for the ceiling alone, of which only 70 are thought to have survived. Were the others really destroyed by him or by the church? Or are they in different hands in different locations? Here is one of the surviving drawings, obviously done for the figure of Adam in the center fresco. The painting technique used is known as buon fresco. It includes different stages like intonaco and arricchio, and then drawings on cardboard using red chalk, transferred to the plaster, and finally coloring using vibrant pigments. Just recently, after 500 years, several wall drawings by Michelangelo and or his disciples were found at the San Lorenzo Church. And there are others. For example, at the Medici chapels, inside the stanza segreta, or secret room, where similarities were noted between the drawings on the wall and the work of Michelangelo. We would like to find Michelangelo's lost neuroanatomical sketches and drawings before they were dressed up with robes or tunics. And maybe we can get some help from this Argentine Pope to gain access to the secret Vatican archives. In conclusion, Michelangelo's unparalleled frescoes in the Sistine Chapel have been construed to depict traditional Roman Catholic biblical interpretations, but we suggest that Michelangelo concealed anatomical drawings of the human brain in his renderings. We analyzed the imagery in the Sistine frescoes in light of the literature surrounding Michelangelo's artistry, with a particular interest in the relationship between certain purported anatomic depictions and details demonstrable using scientific anatomic techniques available during the High Renaissance. A significant number of anatomic references and representations can be imputed to Michelangelo's frescoes. These deft and potentially encoded visual allusions are not obvious. They must be sought out. Our analysis of neuroscientists suggests that the iconographical encryption is not incidental, but rather carefully allegorical. It is recognizable to the trained eye. We hope this anatomic interpretation of Michelangelo's imagery will add a new and accessible scientific dimension to the glory of the Sistine Chapel. The hidden elements might just reflect a flourish of virtuosity and a mastery of anatomy, but they almost certainly no less allude to a chain of significant tropes. Michelangelo's genius, combined to references of his complex relationship with the church, wounded by the Reformation, would not be easily navigated at his time. While we cannot fully fathom all of his intentions, the application of 21st century imaging techniques to the sublime figures that float across the Sistine's wall and altar wall grants a sharper focus on Michelangelo's masterpiece and his mind. We think the anatomic context of these images is purposeful and not just coincidental, and that it was intentionally concealed. It has a common pattern with symbolic connotations. We propose that Michelangelo was sending an encoded message. This is what we call the Michelangelo Code. My email address is nijensohn@aol.com. If requested, I will be glad to share the PDF of the article published in the Neuroscientist in July 2022, The Michelangelo Code, The Quest for Universal Truth, by Luis Savastano, Robert Morreale, Philip Eliasoph, Theo Forcht-Dagi, and Daniel Nijensohn. I thank you very much. I welcome questions and comments, and I am open to your participation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a tour de force. Greatly appreciated. I guess it brings up the philosophical point that can great art exist without great wealth? I can think of no other family throughout the history of Western civilization, at least, that devoted more of their own personal wealth to artists than the Medici family, to support the artists that they did. And then two would be that the latter paintings that he painted in the chapel on the back wall were haunts of his life, of the sermons of Savonarola, who was burned at the stake in 1498, and how that tortured him the rest of his life. The teachings and the Catholic Church burgeoning on the edge of the Reformation also affected him as well. A lot of history there.
Thank you, John, for your comments. I carefully listened to your presidential address, and I learned a lot about quantum physics and the theory of relativity. So this is relatively simple stuff compared to your work. I noticed that among the people that are in the audience is Dr. Philip Eliasoph, our artist in the group. Philip, would you like to add anything from your perspective?
Certainly. Hi, good morning, everybody. I think what you've seen here is a rather audacious and probing thinking about one of the great treasures of human civilization and the peeling away of it and the deconstruction of it. I'd like to make one point, Daniel, and to your colleagues, your medical colleagues listening. Some of us may remember there was this wonderful public television series. It was produced in 1969 with the great British art historian Sir Kenneth Clarke. Some of us remember this. It was called Civilization. And sitting in our living rooms, we were treated to an unfolding of the history of Western visual ideas, humanities, studia humanitas. And when it came to the discussion of both Leonardo and Michelangelo, I remember Sir Kenneth Clarke using the term, these must have been two of the loneliest men who ever lived, meaning it's difficult in our time, in our period of hyper specializations, that we can imagine such a unity of knowledge, a compendium, an encyclopedic understanding of the philosophy of the ancients, the medical advancements. We obviously in medical institutions and healthcare in higher education, we are all specialized in our various departments. If we turn the clock back 500 years, what you have in the consciousness, in the working method of a Michelangelo or Leonardo, you have a compendium of human knowledge. So I would just ask everyone as a humanities professor to not think that it would have been impossible, but it actually would have been greatly to the credit that Michelangelo could have created such a transcendent, unified theory. He was Nobel Prize winner, Pulitzer Prize winner, Kennedy Center Arts winner. He was all in one. And I think that's what Daniel and this team has tried to unravel. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Philip, very much. And everyone can see the extraordinary advantage to use a multidisciplinary approach to these issues. Philip's participation in the group is greatly appreciated, has given us an angle that we neurosurgeons usually miss. Thank you again, Philip, for your friendship and for your cooperation in this project. So,
Thank you,
yes, Marie.
Dr. Nijensohn. That was an outstanding lecture. We thank you very much for studying this and for, just treating us with such an amazing lecture and those studies and the relationship between, the anatomy, neuroanatomy, and art. Yeah, we really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Perez, to have me, and good luck with your two major cases that are coming up. I see you all dressed up and ready to go. And
Ready to
come
go.
on, Monday morning. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robert. Okay, and John. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dan.